All right. This was interesting. In a panel that just happened yesterday at the Unconfiscatable conference happening right now, I'm going to link the entire thing down below in the description. 5 of the smartest minds in crypto discussed where we are with Bitcoin today and what it's realistically going to take to achieve Bitcoin mass adoption. How close are we? Listen to Trace Mayer, Bitcoin OG, mention that you can tell just how close we are by how much the US government doesn't want to give up control. Now, it's not so much the Fed, and it's not even so much the SEC. Both of them have come out and said they're generally in support of innovation. Right now, in 2020, it's really the United States Treasury and the mouthpiece of the Trump administration and head of the US Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, who is trying to come for the individual, you and me, by just having us simply check a little box on our tax form this year, but who really, and listen to Trace, this is where we are with the US government right now, who really is trying to come, Steve Mnuchin, for the businesses and the exchanges who provide the most liquidity for Bitcoin. And with Steve Mnuchin's new travel rules being enforced at least, listen to what this means for you.
You know, there's this need to be able to protect yourself against the state that is confiscating everything. They're confiscating it through inflation. They're now adding a little box on your tax return. They're tracking everything on chain. They're paying Chainalysis a bunch of money to do it. Mnuchin is going to be enforcing the travel rule. So any exchanges that don't attach all of this personal identifying information to your transactions will be decapitated, because if Kraken sends Bitcoin to Binance on behalf of the customer, and the customer even makes the representation that it's going to a personal wallet, Kraken can still be fined, and Binance can be fined $5,000 per day per occurrence. And 70% of transactions are intra-exchange. So if you're not including all this information, you're done. And, you know, sure, we might want the exchanges to be in the fighting truth to power business ideologically, but as the CEO of Netflix said, we're not in that business. We're in the entertainment business. And so in order to maintain the liquidity pools, what do we have to do pragmatically? Because we're not going to get mass adoption if it's extremely difficult and there aren't liquidity pools for the coins. So, you know, this is a big, complicated game that we're playing, and there's a lot that the regulators can do in wielding the violence against, you know, the different institutions and organizations. But
okay, now it is very important that you watch today's entire video. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell notification. You do not want to miss one of our daily videos keeping you informed about cryptocurrency. But watch today's entire video, because we just talked about the problem. The problem is that the US government, under Steve Mnuchin, will not stop until they have every bit of Bitcoin transactional data, just so they can keep tabs through the IRS little checkbox that you fill out as an individual, or through attacking the exchanges. That's the problem. Now, what's the solution?
I do have a question for you then, because you've talked therefore about the state having the ability to seize from us at will and more power. And as we head into a election in November in the US, and I visited a Trump rally yesterday and saw lots of happy Trump supporters. And what we have here is a divided country, but who are politically aligned. As we go into an election, you will have them probably, let's just for the sake of argument say, half the country supporting Trump and then half the supporters, the country supporting whoever the DNC allow. Therefore, we have people who support the state because they're getting behind, they're cheerleading for their leader. So how do we ever get people to actually move to a position where they revolt against the state? Because if your point is that the state is increasing their power, how do we do anything when everyone's still loving them?
well, I mean, Bloomberg loves to not pay taxes, right? Like the more people that have to check that box and write a big check to the IRS, the more painful it gets politically to keep having that type of stuff in place. So, you know, it's mass adoption with the number going up and people having to pay their taxes because they're all locked in with the travel rule. Guess what? They're going to start talking to the their representatives and stuff like that. And fortunately, in the Western democracies, for the most part, we have fair and honest elections, and we have a way to change the process without 20 or 30 million dead people. That's the only way you change it in China.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at least we have that ability and that option here. And that's what we're doing in Wyoming, and we have other states that Tyler and I have met with legislators from other states, and they're copying that legislation. So we got good hodler legislation out there first, with strong property rights at the state level. It's a process to move society as a whole, but the economics can really drive a lot of that, and taxes really help unite people, when they start having to pay them.
Interesting. And hey, by the way, this is just one panel out of hours and hours of quality Bitcoin panels. If you're interested, I'm going to link these down below in the description. Check them all out. I will be checking them all out. Link down below. But let's recap what Trace said here. What is the solution when the state, and again, not so much the Fed, not so much the SEC, but the U.S. Treasury, what's the solution when they're cracking down and half of the country supposedly supports the Trump administration? In the most simplistic terms, Trace Mayer said when the big players, he gave Mike Bloomberg for example, but when the big players start to come in, maybe allocate 1% or 2% of their portfolio to Bitcoin, maybe just simply because they want the gains, they don't like paying taxes. And that's the beauty of living in America. If it was China, you'd have no choice or you'd be dead. But in the US, it may take a little longer, but it is easier to elect the officials that you want making change, that you want making rules. And don't forget, this is the game theory that people like Steve Mnuchin, it's impossible to fight against this over time. The game theory is that these states, people at the state level, they want to drive innovation and economic growth to their state. It's in these local governments' best interests to increase economic growth. Bitcoin fixes this. So this brings us to our final question of when. In my opinion, it's inevitable. Obviously, the state can slow things down. Any government can try and slow things down. But what could they shut down? It's inevitable that this thing looks like it's catching on. And if that's the case, when will we reach mass adoption? We have about 1% of the world's population who owns Bitcoin. Everybody is pretty much, they've heard the word Bitcoin. How long is it going to be till 5%? Or let's even say 50%. When will 50% of the world own Bitcoin? How many years?
Willie, I've got a question for you. As I travel the world and do my job and I meet people, whether I'm checking into a hotel or if I'm in a bar and somebody turns around and says, "What do you do?" I say, "I have a Bitcoin podcast." I almost never get somebody say to me, "Oh, what is Bitcoin?" So I think we have mass awareness. We have mass awareness. I regularly preach to my friends on Facebook about the problems with central banks and how inflation is terrible for their money and their savings. Yet we still don't have mass adoption. So why is that?
Can I get a stab at it, or should you?
Well, I did ask Willie.
I'll just say, human nature is one that looks at things in a linear stance. So we're not very good at looking at exponential growth, which is obviously what Bitcoin is doing. So the equivalent question is, the internet was invented in the 1960s, 1994 now, and why don't we have mass adoption? But the thing is, it was growing at a very hyperbolic rate, and if you were to look at where we are on that adoption curve, we're 1% of the world population holding this asset class, and if you look at the rate of which that's growing, which is 2x every year, so there's kind of a Moore's law of adoption happening right now. It's a 4x in a bull market. If you run those numbers, we're going to have half the world using this stuff within 7 years. So when you say, why don't we have mass adoption? Well, it's happening now. And by the time we hit like 5%, 15%, it'll be just a year or two away before it's there. So I'd look at the model of the internet and what happened by the time we hit the 2000s. There'll be a lot of change.
I love it. Great perspective. Now for you, if it behooves you, drop this video a like, drop a comment below this video. I want this video to be seen by as many people as possible. By the way, my name's Austin. Thanks for joining me. And I'll be talking to you in the comments, but like always, see you tomorrow.